As we approach the first Sunday of Lent, there are so many things that could be said about our readings that draw us deeper into this mystery and the mystery of this journey with the Lord. Even looking at the responsorial psalm, it's Psalm 91. Part of it's quoted by Jesus in his conversations with the enemy as he's tempted by the devil in the desert after his baptism, preparing for his public ministry. Even that psalm itself, it was a psalm that was used by Jewish rabbis in conducting exorcism. So, Jesus, rightly uses it in his work against the devil. But, the first reading really is what strikes my heart as much as anything, and it's Moses preparing the Israelites for entering the promised land. They're right on the cusp of it, and he says, look, when you get there, here's what you're going to have to do. When you come to worship, you give God the first fruits of the land, and you tell the story in this act of offering, in this worship of really the signs and wonders that God had done in your midst. You remember what God has done for you. It was part of the worship that Moses was prescribing for them in the promised land. But in many ways, too, I think about Jesus in his own encounter with the enemy. It's a memory of what God has done for him and for his people that keeps the enemy at bay too. It's that memory of God's power and might and the wonders wrought in their midst that is right worship for them and is the power of God present in that very moment. In fact, the Passover that the Jews celebrated that got them out of Egypt in the first place, and that would continue to be celebrated at the same time every year, they believed had the power of, we call it anamnesis. The power of what God did then is made real here and now. That's what we believe about the Eucharist. The power of the crucifixion is made present to us in this moment. So there's something about the telling of the story of God's power and might and the wonders wrought in our midst that brings about his presence and action here and now. And as we begin this season, the journey is ahead, but at the same time, we're also kind of on the cusp of the glory of God. We're on the cusp of the promised land. And I find myself in a similar place going into Lent as I was going into Advent, of asking myself, what story will I tell in the Easter season of the wonders that God has done here and now? There are always going to be stories of the past and Jesus overcoming sin and death on the cross, but there's also a story of the power of that happening here and now in this season. So in some ways, I just invite you, similarly, in reflecting on these readings for this weekend, but throughout this season, of again asking yourself the story, the question, what story will I tell in the Easter season of what signs and wonders God has wrought in my midst during this time?